Hey YouTube, what's up? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Today post Thursday Night Football Q&A. I'm Chris Towers, and I'll be here for, let's say, the next 40-ish minutes answering your Week 9 questions. We'll talk about some Thursday Night Football reactions. We'll talk about whatever Week 9 questions you guys have. If you guys got trades, waiver wire claims, beat the waiver wire stash guys, all that stuff, hit me in the chat. Make sure you hit that like button. I'll try to answer as many of your questions as I can in the chat. And let's start. We'll start with the Thursday Night Football game, which was a pretty boring game. I'm looking at my Twitter mentions right now, and the most recent one is Damien Pierce, 139 yards and only 13.9 fantasy points. Fix the point system, all caps. And yeah, I mean, like he played better. Like he's going to end up being probably like RB 18 this week. He had 14.1 PPR points last week, and he was RB 21. So I think that range is probably where he's going to end up, mid to low end RB2. And this is sort of the problem with the profile that Damien Pierce has. He's actually been an okay pass catcher for the Texans, or at least he's been involved in the passing game. But most of his value is going to come from the fact that he's a very good running back. And I really do think like this is one that I'm going to take an L on. I did not really believe in Damien Pierce coming into the season. I thought Damien Pierce was... I'll say this. I thought his limited role in college was a reflection of, not necessarily like a reflection of his skill set, but just a sign that he wasn't the guy who's going to be able to be an every down back and be super effective. And clearly he has been that. I mean, he's playing, he's not Christian McCaffrey. He's not playing 90% of the snaps every night, or every week, but he's playing 65, 70% pretty regularly. And that's much more than I expected. He's a legitimately good NFL running back. I don't think he's Kenneth Walker as both a short-term and long-term player, but clearly he's very good. The problem is he's in a bad offense, and he primarily doesn't catch passes. He primarily relies on his ground game. And in PPR especially, that's just, it's a profile that makes it really hard to be very good for fantasy. And, this is something that when you're talking about Nick Chubb, who is arguably the best running back in football, just as a pure rusher, and plays in an offense that runs the ball really well and, does the things that you want, he can be a very good fantasy option. But Damien Pierce in this offense, this Texans offense that might be the NFL's worst right now, especially if Brandon Cooks doesn't get back into the fold and Nico Collins has to miss multiple weeks. Like last week, Damien Pierce ended up with 14.1 PPR points, and that was with, I believe, 3 catches, 20-something yards, and a touchdown on the final drive. The Texans had 161 yards of total offense last week. 90 of that came on their last drive when they were down by 2 scores and didn't really ever have a chance to win. This week, he was much better. 139 yards on 27 carries. The problem is that's all he did. He didn't get a touchdown. The Texans actually moved the ball really well early on, and then someone named Tegan Quitoriano scored a touchdown for them. And, my reaction to that was, well, that's bad news for Damien Pierce, because this probably isn't going to be a situation where he gets a lot of goal line carries or a lot of opportunities to score. And that's what we ended up seeing. So I worry with Damien Pierce, not that he's going to be a bad player and not that he's even going to be a bad fantasy option. I just think there's probably limited upside. I was just talking to Adam Azer on the FFT and 5. That'll be up in the feeds tomorrow morning, or you can watch it on YouTube if you missed it. And what he said was Damien Pierce is probably going to be like RB 10 to 20 most weeks. And I think that's probably fair. I think you want to put the range RB 10 to 24. And I think it'll be, if he scores a touchdown, he can get up to RB 10. If he scores 2 touchdowns, he'll definitely be a top 10 running back most weeks. If he doesn't, you're probably looking at a low-end RB2. And that's just a problem with the profile that Damien Pierce has. And it's to be fair, it's also a problem with, I don't know what's going on. I'm watching the World Series game and someone's performing for the crowd. I can't identify them, but it distracted me. And it's a problem with Kenneth Walker's profile. The difference between Kenneth Walker and Damien Pierce is, one, the Seattle Seahawks offense is just much better than Houston's. And also, he is Kenneth Walker's a home run hitter. He's the kind of guy who can turn any carry into double-digit fantasy points. Damien Pierce has had a couple of long runs like that, but he's not the same kind of athlete that Kenneth Walker is. Non-PPR 100 point. Oh, okay, I thought you were suggesting that 100 point bonuses would be an answer for the Damien Pierce limited upside thing, and it would be. Let's press that like button. Yes, absolutely. Hit that like button. Let's get to your questions. But, here's one. What wide receiver can I get for Devontae Smith? You can't trade Devontae Smith right now because we know he's better than what his last 4 or 3 games have been. He's got no more than 44 yards in any of his last 3 games. He did have 1 game with 15 PR points because he found the end zone, but he hasn't been good lately. And we know he has upside to be a very good fantasy option. So this is the wrong time to try to trade Devontae Smith. You're trading him out of spite. You're trading him out of frustration. Wait until he has a good game because you know it's going to happen. We've seen the upside from Devontae Smith this season. We've seen him have the 10 catches for 87 yards. We've seen him have the 8 catches for 169 yards, 7 for 80. So I think with Devontae Smith, you're frustrated. I get that. Be patient because there's going to be a better opportunity to try to trade him than right now. Sit 1, T. Higgins, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore. That's a really tough one, and I would go with DJ Moore as the guy you're sitting. I still think T. Higgins and Chris Godwin especially, I mean, there have been so many targets over the past 3 games. What is it, 33, 36 targets, something like that over the past 3 games. He hasn't done anything with them, but he looks healthy enough. He doesn't look slow. This isn't like when I watch the Cowboys, I watch Dalton Schultz. He's playing through that torn PCL or that sprained PCL. He looks slow. He looks like late career Jason Witten. And that doesn't mean he can't be good for fantasy, but it does mean that you're asking a lot. Chris Godwin mostly looks like himself, and he's got, doing some quick math, 36 targets over the past 3 games. That's exactly what you want. You give me Chris Godwin getting 12 targets per game, I'm going to rank him as a top 12 wide receiver and just hope that the production follows. So, yeah, I'm sitting DJ Moore, but I like all 3 of those guys as top 12 wide receivers. Let's press that like button. Thank you very much. Hit the like button. If no Eckler, is Sony Michel a must start? And if no Jonathan Taylor, is Deion Jackson a must start? And would you play both over Swift? So if there's no Austin Eckler and if there's no Jonathan Taylor, I do think I would play both Deion Jackson and Sony Michel ahead of DeAndre Swift was the question that you asked. Sorry, I'm trying to find there was a quote from Dan Campbell that I'm trying to find because it was, kind of alarming the way he put it. And let me find it here. Okay. We probably gave Swift 1 too many carries. DeAndre Swift had 5 carries last week. So that's pretty concerning. He's coming back. He's dealing with this ankle and the shoulder injury. Clearly he's not 100%. He admitted as much after practice, I think on Wednesday, but he's going to keep playing. And the thing about DeAndre Swift is he's the kind of guy who, like I mentioned with Kenneth Walker being a home run hitter, DeAndre Swift is the kind of guy who can be worth 13 PPR points with 1 play. But that's always risky. And if he's going to be an 8 to 10 touch guy or an 8 to 12 touch guy moving forward, which that's kind of what I'm taking from that Dan Campbell quote, then I do think DeAndre Swift is probably more like a boomer bust RB2, where if he hits a big play, if he gets into the end zone, he's going to be very good for fantasy, but there's going to be a lot of risk with the way he's used. Let's see. I'm looking for a couple more things. Start 2. Okay, you're starting Josh Jacobs. I don't care that he was bad last week. It's Josh Jacobs. I think at this point he's earned that. Aaron Jones, Dalvin Cook, David Montgomery. So I think David Montgomery is the one that you can easily kind of push to the side. I want to avoid the Bears running backs if I can. I've got him and Khalil Herbert outside of my top 20. It's not, not like I'm burying them, but it is, there are 6 teams on bye. So in a normal week, neither of them would be an RB2 for me. I think that situation's a little messy. David Montgomery, still the number 1 running back, still getting the passing downs work. So Khalil Herbert, you're kind of either way. I think with either one of them, you're kind of hoping to get into the end zone, and that's doable against Miami. The Bears offense should be able to move the ball, but I'm not super sold on either of them being high-end options, so I think David Montgomery you can throw out. Aaron Jones versus Dalvin Cook is very tough. I have them back-to-back in my rankings. Aaron Jones is RB9, Dalvin Cook is RB10, so I would go with Aaron Jones, but it's very, very close. That matchup against Detroit, though, their defense has just been awful. So I think you can start Aaron Jones with confidence. Do I drop James Robinson or do I wait and see and also trade Scary Terry for Amon-Ra St. Brown? Yes, absolutely trade Amon-Ra St. Brown. Trade Terry McLaurin. I always want to call him Terrence. Like Scarence Terrence is what I call him. And that's not really what his nickname is. Nobody really calls him that. Drop James. I mean, look, if Deion Jackson is available, I think it's fine to drop James Robinson. But I think there's a chance James Robinson ends up being the lead back for the Jets. And, maybe now that he's moving away from his initial return from the Achilles injury, he can start to show some more burst. Early on he was playing well, but it didn't really look sustainable. Ended up not being so. But it's a Jets offense that really wants to run the ball. It really wants to get their running backs involved. So I do think there's a chance that James Robinson will be worth starting. There's limited upside, but I wouldn't give up on him unless there's a really good option on waivers. Let's see. Demarcus Robinson or Jarvis Landry rest of season given the news. So the news being Rashad Bateman having foot surgery, Michael Thomas having toe surgery, both likely out for the rest of the regular season, at least, if not longer. I would go with Jarvis Landry. He's more of a proven commodity than Demarcus Robinson. We've seen Jarvis Landry, even in this Saints offense, early on, he was garnering a decent amount of targets, getting open down the field. He's someone that I think can be a wide receiver 3 moving forward. I think Chris Olave is obviously the number one guy in New Orleans, but that offense actually sneaky isn't bad. They're 8th in points scored. They're moving the ball okay. I think Jarvis Landry can be a useful option. My expectations for Demarcus Robinson are really, really low. So yeah, I would take Jarvis Landry. I think Jarvis Landry versus Devin Duvernay is a closer call, but I think I would still go with Devin Duvernay in that situation. Chuba Hubbard, James Robinson, Caleb Huntley, or Cordarrelle Patterson, I assume. So we don't know if Patterson's going to be back, so I can't answer that one. But if I had to choose between Chuba Hubbard, James Robinson, and Caleb Huntley, gotta scroll through my rankings here, and I think I would go with James Robinson, but I don't love it against Buffalo, so actually I'll go with Caleb Huntley. I'm going to make that change in my rankings right now. Caleb Huntley ahead of James Robinson and ahead of Chuba Hubbard. I figure Chuba Hubbard was actually the lead back for the Panthers 2 weeks ago, so that's one thing to keep in mind. But if Deontay Foreman was so good last week that I have to assume that there's going to be a switch to Deontay Foreman getting more of a primary role there. Let's see. Okay. All right. I put the World Series game on just to, let's see how the game ends, but go Phillies. PPR for flex, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, Deontay Foreman, or Tyler Boyd. In PPR, it's going to be T. Higgins for me. I have my concerns about the Bengals offense. I want to be clear. I do think there were moments where the offense looked pretty ugly when, Jamar Chase was healthy. The week 1 through 4-ish, they couldn't get the ball down the field. They were really struggling. They had to string a bunch of plays together just to move the ball down the field. And I think that's what this offense is going to be now. But T. Higgins is a really, really talented wide receiver. He's still going to get a ton of targets. I think that offense is going to be better than they were in week 8. So T. Higgins is the guy I would go with here. Who should I start at tight end if Mark Andrews is out? Taysom Hill, Hayden Hurst, or Tyler Higbee? Well, is Isaiah Likely available? Because if he is, Isaiah Likely would be a top 6 tight end for me if Mark Andrews is out. Let me see exactly where I would put him. It probably would be as high as 5. So yeah, I'm going Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, who already played and had a great game. Kyle Pitts, Gerald Everett. Yeah, if Mark Andrews is out, I think Isaiah Likely might be my number 4 tight end. I think he's a really good player. So yeah, I would go with him. Let's see. Grade the trade, half-point PPR. Trade Foreman, receive DK Metcalf. Other running backs are Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara. You got great running back depth. I think this is the perfect trade to try to make for Deontay Foreman. If you can aim a little higher than DK Metcalf, even, I think that would make perfect sense. What aiming higher than DK Metcalf would be, I'll throw out some names. Tyler Lockett is probably a little higher than DK Metcalf for me, but that's the right range. Gabe Davis, Tyler Boyd, Mike Evans, Jalen Waddle. I don't know if you could get any of those guys, so I think you did well with Metcalf, but this is what I would be trying to do because there's almost no chance that Deontay Foreman is going to have even nearly as good a game as he did in week 8. This is probably the high point of his value. No Chuba Hubbard last week. I think that's the point where you try to move Foreman if you don't need him. He should be a decent fantasy option, an RB3 who needs touchdowns. But if you can get something more than that for him and you don't need him, I think moving Deontay Foreman makes a ton of sense. Heading to the playoffs, I don't want to be holding 2 Chiefs running backs. I'd love to be able to drop one. I think you could drop any of the Chiefs running backs, honestly. If you don't need Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Isaiah Pacheco and you have a bigger need on waivers or there's somebody out there with more upside, honestly, why not take a chance on Isaiah Likely? If you have Isaiah Pacheco, I would rather have Likely than Pacheco in the battle of the Isaiahs. Just because I don't really think they're this Chiefs offense hasn't been great for running backs since Kareem Hunt, really, but even Damian Williams had a couple of stretches, but for the most part, they've cycled a bunch of running backs in. That's clearly what they're doing right now. They've got 3 running backs that they trust. I think it's going to remain a 3-headed backfield unless there's an injury. And even if, let's say Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets hurt and Isaiah Pacheco gets a chance to be the lead back, well, Jerick McKinnon's not going anywhere. Jerick McKinnon's still going to have a role, I think. So I don't view any of the Chiefs running backs as starting caliber options right now. They're desperation plays. All right, I don't care who you're voting for, so don't put that in the chat. That's not relevant. Hayden Hurst or Kyle Pitts. So, look, man, I think Kyle Pitts is going to be frustrating all year, but I'm just going to start him. He's tight end 4 for me this week. I could see Hayden Hurst is tight end 6, so it's not like there's a massive gap there. I do think Hayden Hurst is going to get enough opportunities to be worth starting, but Kyle Pitts reminded us last week why, amid a very frustrating season, you still probably just need to start him every week because he's such a dynamic playmaker. There are not a lot of tight ends who are actually good. And I think Kyle Pitts is very good as a player. And so the situation is bad, yes, but there are going to be enough scenarios where he's worth using. Gabe Davis or Allen Lazard? I think this is easy. I would go with Gabe Davis. I'm not an Allen Lazard guy. I feel okay about it. I think he's this is a hard player. Touchdown dependent running backs are, I think, a little easier to value than touchdown dependent wide receivers, just because running back touchdowns are a little easier to predict. Most teams, they get in close, they're going to give their running back a chance. The Packers, they're not necessarily guaranteed to give Allen Lazard a chance. I know that that's been the case so far, but I don't know. When he doesn't get into the end zone, he just doesn't do much. He doesn't have this. So let's put it this way. If Gabe Davis has a bad game, I think there's a roughly equal chance that Allen Lazard has a bad game. If they both have good games, Gabe Davis's game is probably going to be better, right? He's in a better offense. He's got actually a similar target share. I think Allen Lazard's 19% and Gabe Davis is 17% or something. So it's not even that big of an edge for Allen Lazard. So yeah, just give me the guy who looks like a freakishly good big play guy, and that's Gabe Davis. Outside of Kelsey and Andrews, is there any other tight end you'd rather have than Goddard rest of the season? No, I think maybe George Kittle. That's the only one, though. I think Dallas Goedert, the way that offense uses him, this was something that when you looked at this offense last season and what Dallas Goedert did, 10.9 yards per target, that's really hard to do, especially for a tight end. I mean, for anyone, but especially for a tight end. Well, he was at 10.3 coming into today, and I think he added to that. What did he get? 100 yards on 9 targets? Yeah, that's about 10.3 yards per target. So that's just what this offense does. It creates. There are so many situations where Dallas Goedert, like the archetypical Dallas Goedert catch in my mind is either he catches the ball with just no one within 20 yards of him, which just seems to happen twice a game, where he just has so much room ahead of him. Or, there was one big play today where they use him on those little tight end screens and he's got 4 blockers in front of him. And that's what we saw today. So that offense is so good at creating efficient scenarios for Dallas Goedert that, I think he's the tight end 3, at worst tight end 4. Let's see. Should I drop Brian Robinson for a Deion Jackson stash? I'm fine with that. Brian Robinson, he does get the Eagles next week, I believe. And as we just saw, when they're missing Jordan Davis, they are vulnerable against the run. But I think Brian Robinson is just like the most boring starting running back in fantasy football. I know his story is great, and this is not a commentary on that. It's an amazing story. I'm rooting for him, but the way he's used in a bad Washington offense, 2 targets in 4 games, 1 touchdown, like this is it's going to be like, if he gets into the end zone, you might get 13 points from him, but I feel like there's very little upside for Brian Robinson. So I think Deion Jackson has more upside. Do I think James Conner will miss this week? I have no idea. There's no way for me to answer that question. He's practiced on a limited basis Wednesday and Thursday, but he's been practicing for a couple of weeks now without playing. It just kind of sounds like it's a pain tolerance issue and that they won't really know until he's ready to go. So I'm trying to avoid the Arizona backfield right now. It hasn't been great. I think if Connor plays, he's probably like a low end RB2. If Connor doesn't play, Benjamin's probably a low end RB2. So Curtis Samuel or Josh Palmer. I would go with Josh Palmer. I have him ranked surprisingly high. He's wide receiver 24 for me. It does not sound like we're going to get Mike Williams. Mike Williams definitely out this week, or almost certainly. I guess I can't say definitely until he's officially ruled out, but he's not on IR yet. And then Keenan Allen is probably not going to play with that hamstring injury. So, he said he's not going to play until he's 100%. I don't think he's going to be 100%. So Palmer is just a couple of spots ahead of Curtis Samuel, but I would go with him. Let's scroll down. Deontay Foreman is a good play this week. I think he's fine. I would be trying to trade Deontay Foreman, but he's a top 20 running back for me. I have him. The problem is I don't think there's going to be much of a passing game role, especially if Chuba Hubbard's back. And when Hubbard was healthy in week 7 before the injury, he was the lead back. I think when Hubbard left the game, it was something like Hubbard had 9 carries and Foreman had 7, and then Foreman got a handful at the end of the game when Hubbard went out. So I think I think Foreman's a decent low-end RB2, but a somewhat risky one. Pick 2 in PPR, Mixon, Walker the third. Steve, man, that's all right. So you're sitting Deion Jackson. That's the easy call. Mixon, Walker, and Stevenson is really tough. I think I'm sitting Walker there, but I don't feel great about it. And, that might just ultimately come down to the fact that it's PPR. And I think Ramondre Stevenson and Joe Mixon are more likely to catch some passes. And then pick 1, Pittman or Palmer. I'm going with, let me see. I think I have Pittman ranked ahead of Palmer. I don't feel great about that, but that's the way I've got it. Should I trade Kenyon Drake and Antonio Gibson for Keenan Allen? RBs are stacked. I only have 3 wide receivers with Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, and Michael Pittman. Got Cook, Henry, Kamara. Yeah, you should trade. Yeah, I don't know exactly how the bye weeks line up with those guys, but I know Henry's already had his. I would think that there's no real situation where you're ever going to need Kenyon Drake or Antonio Gibson with Cook, Henry, Kamara, and ETN. Obviously, injuries happen, but look, if you have the kind of injuries that make a Cook, Henry, Kamara, ETN, RB group not good enough, your season's probably not going well. So I'm worried about Keenan Allen. I'm really worried that he's not going to be able to come back from this hamstring injury and be the guy that you need him to be, but it's worth the upside. This is the kind of trade you should be making when you're in that kind of situation. I might try to prefer going after like Chris Godwin, who is at least, healthier. But I think Keenan Allen, this is a great trade for you to try to make. Which Bears running back would I take the rest of the season? Do I have to take one? Because I think it's just going to be a frustrating mess. I think it's going to be, if I have to take one, I would take David Montgomery because he's still getting the passing downs work. The running work has been split relatively evenly. It doesn't matter if we think Khalil Herbert's a better player. The Bears coaching staff is still giving David Montgomery the RB1 treatment. Even this hot hand approach has still led to more touches and more snaps for David Montgomery each game. So I think he's the guy, even if it's, maybe there's more upside with Herbert if Montgomery gets hurt. You could, I guess, maybe that's the way to look at it, is if you need a running back to start for the next 3 weeks, David Montgomery's the guy. If you're in a situation where you don't need either one of them and you're just, hey, who's got more upside? Khalil Herbert has more upside. Let's see. Start Kadarius Toney or Nyheim Hines. I would rather start neither of them. What kind of situation are you in that you are relying on two guys who just got traded and may not have a role this week? I mean, I think Nyheim Hines is going to have a role, but this is the thing with the Buffalo Bills, and I don't understand. They've been so insistent on adding a pass catching running back, and every time there's a running back available for trade, people are like, "Oh yeah, I hope Christian McCaffrey goes to the Bills," and it's like, well, no, man, that this isn't an offense that, like, the 49ers, the way they run their offense, it's all about yak and it's all about making things easy for Jimmy Garoppolo. The Bills don't need to do that because Josh Allen's really good. And Josh Allen's a really good runner and he's really, athletic. And so when they get near the goal line, like, it's really good when Josh Allen takes off to run. Obviously, you want to keep him healthy and you want to avoid injury and all that, but like, the ideal outcome for a Buffalo Bills play is almost never going to be dump it off to Nyheim Hines. Maybe he goes out on a wheel route and you can hit a big play that way, but like, you got Gabe Davis, you got Stephon Diggs, you got Josh Allen. Like, this should be a team that is not focusing on their running backs, and it probably won't be. So I don't think there's a ton of upside for Nyheim Hines there. I think Devin Singletary is still going to be the lead back. And Kadarius Toney, look, there's plenty of upside there. He might be the most talented player on the Chiefs passing game besides Travis Kelce now. But he also has played like 37 snaps this season and was mostly a non-factor last season outside of 2 games. So, like, I think he's a talented player. I think he's going to step in as the punt returner, and he'll probably get a third of the offensive snaps, and maybe he sparks. Maybe this is the thing that the Chiefs need to, start to settle on a more concentrated passing attack rather than, moving between, whoever, Mecole Hardman and Juju Smith-Schuster and whoever kind of is hot that day. Maybe Toney can be the guy who steps in and, alongside Juju Smith-Schuster can be the 1A, 1B behind Travis Kelce, or 2A, 2B, if you want to put it that way. But I would rather not start either of these two guys if I can avoid it. Thank you for thanking me for my hard work. Would I drop Brandon Cooks for a high upside stash like Isaiah Pacheco or Jalen Warren? That's fine. My preference would be to not drop Brandon Cooks. We've seen him be a must-start guy with Davis Mills as his quarterback, but I also think Davis Mills has kind of been figured out to a certain extent. I'm not sure he's a particularly good player. And Brandon Cooks doesn't want to be on the Texans, and we don't know if he's going to play next week or even the rest of the season at this point. I would assume he will, but yeah, I think Brandon Cooks is absolutely droppable. And, Pacheco and Jalen Warren are both, solidly high upside players. Ooh, nice catch by Chaz McCormick too. Not save a run, but to save extra bases. That's a tough break for JT Realmuto. Pick 2 in PPR. I think I answered this question already. I went with Mixon and Stevenson, Deion Jackson, if Taylor sits, or Ian. So if Taylor and James Conner are both out, I think I would rank Deion Jackson ahead of Eno Benjamin. That one's going to be really close, and we'll see what ends up happening there. But I think that's the way I would go. Eno Benjamin, they'll both be like low end RB2s. Let's scroll down, and Devontae Adams and Devin Singletary enough to get. Look, anytime we get these trades where it's like, is this enough to get this player? If the other person says yes, then yeah, it was enough. If I had Derrick Henry, there's no way I would trade him for Devontae. Well, Yeah, I wouldn't trade him for Devontae Adams and Devin Singletary, although I'm still very high on Devontae Adams. I'm not sure why Derek Carr has been so bad, and that, the catch rate there has been so low and all that. But I do like if the second player was better, if it was Devontae Adams and Miles Sanders or Damien Pierce, I'd be more inclined to do that. But, if you can get that, go for it. Let's see. Drop Michael Thomas for Kadarius Toney or Garrett Wilson. I would rather have Garrett Wilson than Kadarius Toney. He's already the number one guy, in his offense, whereas we're hoping Kadarius Toney can be that guy. So yeah. Palmer, Kirk, Pittman, pick one. I believe I have Pittman ranked highest of that group. I don't feel great about it, and it's basically even. They're between 20 and 24 at wide receiver for me. So to a certain extent, I mean, we've got, this is the problem with ordinal rankings where it's like 21, 22, 23 is like, it implies that there's like, feel really confident in that ranking. And it's really like any of those three guys, I think they've got similar usages. They're all going to get 7 to 9 targets probably. And, whoever gets into the end zone is probably going to be the best of them. So it's tough. But yeah, I do have Pittman ranked highest. Isaiah Likely is going to be a problem. Likely. Mark Andrews and Darren Waller. Would you drop Waller if Andrews doesn't play to pick up Likely or take the 0? No, I wouldn't drop Waller, and you probably have a worse player. So yeah, I would hope you have a worse player than Darren Waller, at least a player with less upside, because what you don't want to do is give your opponents who are relying on the Dawson Knox and Tyler Conklin and Robert Tunyons of the world. What you don't want to do is give them, a solid 13 points per game from Darren Waller down the stretch. So I would hopefully hang on to him. If Patterson is ready, should I start him for Foreman or Jamal Williams? No, I would sit Patterson. It's not a guaranteed sit, but just given the injury, given the way the Falcons have talked about how they want to use him, the fact that they know he broke down last season, they want to be careful with him. I wouldn't expect a massive role for him if he gets active this weekend. So there's one person in the chat who I see has put their question in there a bunch. I already answered it at this point, and it's just patience. That's all I want to say. Okay, guys, it's just have a little patience. Take some deep breaths. I know you want to get your questions asked. I'm going to try to get to them. If I don't get to your question, I apologize, but don't spam the chat because that just makes it a bad situation for everyone. It annoys me. So, this one was like he put the question in there like 12 times over the course of like 7 minutes. And it's like, I got to it eventually. So, patience. Our Thursday night hero. Oh, thanks, John. Yeah, hit that like button. Quick question flattery will get you everywhere with me. Standard league, bench 1, Pittman, Lazard, Zay Jones, Allen Robinson, Josh Palmer. I think of that group, I'm benching. It comes down to Allen Robinson or Zay Jones, and I love when this happens. When I get a question and I go look at my rankings, and just FYI, I don't have my rankings memorized. It's like 150 players. It would be impossible to have them memorized. And I've got Zay Jones one spot ahead of Allen Robinson. So that's clear. You love to have Zay Jones ahead of Allen Robinson by one spot. Likely or Tonyan? You know what? Tonyan does have a good matchup. That's the one thing, is the Lions have been very bad on defense all around, bad against tight ends, all that. I think Likely's just a better player, probably, but I think I would go with Tonyan. Unless if Mark Andrews is out, you play Likely over Tonyan. But if Mark Andrews is playing, you go with Tonyan over Likely. Mostert or Jamal Williams? I am going with Raheem Mostert. I understand there are concerns about Damien Pierce and what that's going to mean for Mostert's role. The thing with Damien Pierce versus Jeff Wilson is I think Jeff Wilson was insurance for the Dolphins. Someone who already knows the system, so there's no learning curve there. In case, Raheem Mostert obviously has struggled with injuries in the past. I think that was much more about let's get a guy that we know we can trust. Clearly, Chase Edmonds has not been a good fit for them. So let's get someone that we know is going to be successful in this offense if something happens to Raheem Mostert. But Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson have been on the same team before, and Raheem Mostert was the clear lead back. He was a more productive player. I don't think Jeff Wilson's going to come and take Raheem Mostert's job. So I'm still looking at Raheem Mostert as a really solid RB2, as long as he stays healthy, which, there's no guarantee of that with Raheem Mostert. We're going to do, let's say, another 5 minutes of questions. So get your questions in. I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. Would I start Eno if Connor is out, or Jackson if no Taylor? I would go with Deion Jackson over Eno if both Connor and Taylor are out. Hugby or Tunyon at tight end, half PPR. I need upside. I'm worried about Tyler Higbee. The passing game role has not been the same over the past couple of weeks, and this was the concern that I had when he was putting up good numbers early on in the season. Was his production was mostly a function of how bad that offense was. They just didn't have anybody else who could do anything. And so Tyler Higbee was getting all these dump offs and short passes that were just a result of nobody else being able to do anything. And now they've kind of gone away from Tyler Higbee. It's not like the rest of the offense has stepped up. It's just Tyler Higbee's not good, or he wasn't doing a lot with the targets he was getting, I guess is the better way to phrase it, although I think he's kind of just a mad player. And so now he's back to being a mad player. But I would take him over Robert Tunyon. Hines or James Robinson? I would go with James Robinson over Nyheim Hines. Bench Brady for Fields if Brady doesn't show up this week the rest of the season. I don't think you want to make a rest of season call on either of these guys at this point. I think it's perfectly fine to view Justin Fields in the same range as Tom Brady at this point, which is, man, that's wild how far Tom Brady has fallen that's what we're talking about, because Justin Fields has been pretty good lately, but it's not like he's putting up, he's been a top 12 tight end over the past, I think each of the last 4 weeks has been a top 12 tight end. He's only averaging like 21 PP or 6 point per passing touchdown points per game. That was a weird way to phrase that. 21 points per game and 6 point per passing touchdown leagues. So it's not like he's been incredible. It's just the rest of the position's been pretty bad. So I would still take Brady rest of season over. I answered one of your questions already. I don't know what stop being guys. I'm trying. Okay. Brady versus Fields. Yeah, I think you might reach a point where you play matchups, but I don't think you should drop. I don't think either Brady or Fields at this point is someone that you drop because you feel confident in the other one. I think you just probably need to hang on to both of them and hope one of them figures it out enough to be that guy, or just play the matchups. It's not personal. Nothing is personal. Don't do that. Why does everyone still have Michael Thomas? Well, we only found out he was out for the season today. So, let's give people some time. Start Waller, Pitts, or Tunyon. I would start Pitts even if Waller plays. That's the way I would go. Okay, see, that's another one. Let's see. Going for some more questions. And it makes it harder when there's, one person spamming the chat. Thoughts on Chase? Jamar Chase for Kenneth Walker and Deshaun Watson, I assume. Not streaming quarterback. Lance went down. Okay. So giving up Jamar Chase and getting Kenneth Walker and Deshaun Watson, I think that's perfectly fine. I think that's a great trade. I'm worried about Jamar Chase. I know there was that report that he's built different and he can come back quicker from this injury, and maybe he can. I don't ever want to write guys off. DK Metcalf, I was shocked that he played last week, shocked that he was performed well. So, that tells you that, none of this is perfectly predictable, but I think, there's enough concern about Jamar Chase when he comes back. One, when does he come back? Is it week 12? Is it week 13? And then whether, he'll be himself, then I think getting Kenneth Walker for him is great. Yeah, Mark Andrews playing on Monday night does make the situation with him really hard, and it might just be best to just avoid it unless you can get Isaiah Likely. And then just if you've got Andrews and he isn't cleared by Sunday, if you've got Andrews and you don't have Likely, you probably just sit Andrews unless it looks like he's going to play. But yeah, it's that is tough. This is why if you can get Likely, try. Make sure you subscribe to the newsletter. He puts a ton of work into them. Then I do. That's it. It is great. Hit the like button. We're going to take a couple more questions before we go. Was offered Lockett and Zeke for, you got the Herbert, could be Justin, could be Khalil. Okay, it's Justin because you already have Jalen Hurts. So Jalen Hurts is, I think, clearly ranked ahead of Justin Herbert rest of season. Eagles have already had their bye, so that helps. Lockett and Zeke for, you give up Herbert and Sutton to get. So I think Lockett and Sutton is pretty close. And Zeke should be a solid RB2. It's not, I don't think there's the huge upside for Ezekiel Elliott anymore, but he's still the guy for them. It's still going to be, there was a lot of talk like, oh, they should, the Cowboys should make Tony Pollard the number one running back. And maybe they should, maybe they should use Tony Pollard more than they use Ezekiel Elliott, whatever. But, this week there was a lot of talk about Tony Pollard was getting run down. This was from the coaching staff. This was from Pollard himself that, he's not necessarily the guy who can play every snap. So I think Ezekiel Elliott's still going to have plenty of touchdown opportunities and a good offense and still going to get 15 carries per game probably and a couple of targets. So I think he's going to be an RB2. Devontae Adams for Brady and Fournette. I think that's fine. Yeah, I think I'd rather have the Fournette and Brady side because I think they'll still figure it out. That's the one thing is that I've written Brady off before in 2019 and he came back with the Buccaneers and looked awesome. And it was clearly just, he didn't have the weapons. And I think it's fine to say that at 45 years old, Tom Brady's margin for error isn't what it used to be, but he's still got great weapons. And I still think Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are going to figure it out. And there's been a couple of opportunities over the last couple of weeks, especially Mike Evans dropped a long touchdown that would have been like a 63-yarder. Mike Evans and Tom Brady haven't been on the same page on a couple other ones. And I think once they figure that stuff out, Brady's still going to be very good. Smart to stash Watson if I have Cooper. I don't think having Cooper changes it one way or the other. You're still looking at holding a quarterback who's not going to play for the next 4 weeks, I think. Right? 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah. So week 13 is, I think, is the first game he's eligible to be back. And look, this is a guy who hasn't played since 2020. He's going to be stepping on a football field for basically the first time in 2 years. So we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know if the Browns are going to have much to play for, given the way their season's gone. We don't know if that's going to be, obviously I think it's going to be a light pass option or a light pass offense. So if you've got a roster spot to play with, sure. But I would rather be trying to cycle through Deion Jackson and Isaiah Likely and players who have significant upside at other situations. Did I miss the Akers talk? Well, I guess we can talk about Akers to close out the show. I think the Rams offense is just a kind of a disaster. And I think that's especially true of the running backs. That last week they had 3 different running backs get, I think, at least 20% of the snaps. Now they've got Cam Akers practicing in full today. They're talking about getting him back involved in the offense. Maybe the time off got him going. Maybe he needed to get off his feet, and that'll help him rediscover the burst that he clearly didn't have at the beginning of the season, and I don't think had in the playoff run. I thought he looked bad in the playoff run. I thought he looked bad to start the season. It's a bad situation as well, so I don't want to say it's all his fault. He's not being put in situations to succeed, but I think the likeliest outcome is Cam Akers just isn't that guy anymore. And I'm not sure he was ever that guy. I think he might have been a little overrated as a prospect to begin with. His college production wasn't great. I know the situation was bad, but at some point, like his rookie season production, he wasn't super efficient. He wasn't catching passes. He wasn't breaking big plays. It was a huge volume that was working out for him. And if anyone gets 25 carries and then they have some talent, they're going to be pretty good in fantasy and a good offense. But I'm not really expecting much from Cam Akers coming back from this injury. I was skeptical last season. I'm skeptical still. That being said, if you've got a roster spot to play with, we were talking about Deshaun Watson and whether he's worth stashing. I would rather have Cam Akers on my bench than Deshaun Watson, just in case he can become a valuable wide or RB2 in that Rams offense. The offense has to get better, and I don't think Cooper Kupp's injury is going to help, but maybe Van Jefferson having expanding role can unlock something for that offense, or maybe the offensive line starts to gel, or maybe they sign Odell Beckham, something that can happen to get this offense going and make it a place where you want one of your running backs to be. Maybe Cam Akers can be that guy. I think it's very unlikely, but I would rather take that chance than, sit there with a dead roster spot with Cam or with Deshaun Watson for the next 4 weeks. So those are my thoughts on Cam Akers. Those were my thoughts on a bunch of your week 9 questions. And those are all the thoughts I have. This is my Friday. I'm going to go finish up the newsletter, maybe have a beer before bed. Then it's the weekend. I'll see you guys on Sunday morning at 11:30 a.m. for the FFT Q&A right here on the YouTube channel, FFT, youtube.com/fantasyfootballtoday. Make sure you subscribe to Fantasy Football Today in 5 podcasts. Make sure you subscribe to the FFT newsletter, cbssports.com/newsletters for that one. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.